Your phone line is muted. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording and slides will be made available later. Hello, everyone. My name is Leslie Gabay-Swanston. I'm the Director of Program and Systems Quality at the National Summer Learning Association. Welcome to our webinar on teaching virtual learning online. Before we get started, here's an overview of our discussion today. First, I'll share a little bit about NSLA for those of you who are unfamiliar before we hear from our expert panel. After that, we will wrap up with some announcements about upcoming events and webinars. As we go along, if you have a question for our panelists, please put them in the Q&A box. We'll try to catch them if they're in the chat box, but it's easier for us to see them and ask and answer them live if they are in the Q&A box. So a little bit about NSLA. The National Summer Learning Association is the only national nonprofit exclusively focused on addressing the achievement and opportunity gaps by increasing access to summer learning opportunities. NSLA's goal is to increase nationwide the number of high-quality summer learning programs. To achieve this goal, NSLA recognizes and disseminates what works, offers expertise and support for programs and communities, and advocates for summer learning as a solution for equity and excellence in education. NSLA's work is driven by the belief that all children and youth deserve high-quality summer learning experiences that will help them succeed in college, career, and life. Core to the work is the recognition that high-quality summer learning programs work and have been shown to improve reading and math skills, school attachment, motivation, and relationships with adults and peers. We know that summer is a time of great inequity for young people, and we believe that promoting and supporting summer opportunities is a way to address this. This goes beyond the summer learning that's in our name. We also want to see programs and communities addressing access to other resources like meals and youth employment. Summer is a time for innovation and exploration. Without some of the constraints of the school year, kids are able to try different ways of learning and interact with other adults and peers that they might not otherwise. It's also a time of innovation for adults, whether that's opportunities for professional development, trying out new teaching methods, or exploring new partnerships. So I'm happy to welcome our first presenter today, Kirsten Peterson from the Education Development Center. Kirsten?
Hi, thank you so much, Leslie. As Leslie said, I'm Kirsten Peterson, and I am a very proud former camp counselor for many, many years and high school teacher, and now I work at Education Development Center, which if you want to make the next slide, Leslie. Sorry, Leslie's controlling our slides, so you're going to hear me telling her when to move them. But EDC is a wonderful place. It is a nonprofit research and development organization. We're just outside of Boston and very much committed to Leslie's organization and similar types of organizations. We do education, health, and human development, both domestically and internationally. Again, nonprofit, really focused on making the world a better place. And this was a great fit for us because we have a lot of work around out-of-school learning. The National Center for After-School Enrichment is part of EDC, and we also have extensive work in online learning design and facilitation, which is sort of my area of expertise, if you will. So happy to talk with you today about a few tips for taking your learning online in the summer when that's not normally the way we tend to do things all the time in the summer. So how about the next slide here? Okay, great. So when I first met Leslie, I wasn't paying enough attention, and I was thinking that I was doing my normal talk on online teaching and learning, which is usually to universities or high school state departments of ed, and really sort of focused on the traditional classroom environment. And truly the tips are very, very, very similar, but the audience, this is a little bit different. So I was paying attention to Leslie's focus for these webinars, and I just wanted to highlight here that the hallmark of a high quality summer program is the way that it creates the summer culture. And that it's a little bit different from the school year and really promotes a sense of community. It's not that students still aren't, and participants, kids are not learning. There are lots of different ways to learn, as Leslie said, and make connections and learn in different ways, but it is a focus on difference. It's a focus on fun and on community. So I went back and was spending a lot of time looking through all of my camp counselor photos, and I picked out two because I thought, what would I have done in 1991 when I was directing camps for the YMCA in Billings, Montana? And I grabbed two, and I wonder what you all think. Could we do these things online? And not exactly, but my answer would be yes. If I needed to, we could be on Zoom and we could be putting our faces in pies with whipped cream and filming ourselves and laughing and making a contest and a game out of it, and we'd be building community. It'd be a little different, but we could still do it. And gaming, of course. So we'll talk a little bit about how to make some of these things happen. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you so much. So what we want to be thinking about, and what I'm hoping everybody sort of keeps in their mind as all of our panelists are talking today, is how can we really maintain a feeling of community and facilitate learning and engagement for our kids this summer, even if we are in sort of forced remote learning, right? Even if we're at a distance. And my work over the past 2 decades at EDC has really been, it has been related to online teaching and learning, both for teacher professional development and for K-12 students. But the real focus has been on interpersonal experiences and a high touch, if you will, type of learning. And I think that lends itself well, that sort of niche lends itself well to what we need to focus on in the summer to keep people engaged. So let's go to the next slide. So I just have 2 slides because we have a lot of panelists today and we have lots of tips. And I think you'll also hear from Leslie at the end. We're hoping to do a follow-up where it won't just be tips, but where we can actually get in groups maybe and dig into some concrete strategies for making the types of things you all need to make happen and want to make happen in your individual programs come to life in online environments. But just at sort of a global tip level, I pulled out some of the things that I think are most important when it comes to communication, and communication is absolutely essential with online learning, because you do not have your students right in front of you, or your campers right in front of you, where you can sort of physically get their attention by, you know, tapping on them or getting eye contact with them. So it's a little bit different. But number one, and this is always the most important to me, and I like to call it human infrastructure, because I think when people think about, quote, online learning and online teaching, the first thing they think about is the word online, and they tend to associate that with technology. And they'll say, oh gosh, this is so hard. I don't know all the technology, and I don't believe you can, you know, have a relationship with somebody with just technology. And they sort of focus on that. And, you know, I did a webinar a week ago for a community college, very rural in Arizona, Yavapai. And there were a lot of professors who were really several in their 70s. And there was one man who taught ballroom dance, and he was forced to do remote learning, ballroom dancing. And he said he was in such a panic and he was so frustrated, and he didn't understand the technology. And he figured out at the end that if he just took a video, he had figured out how to take a video of himself doing tap steps and put it on YouTube, and the students watched it, and it was great. And he thought, okay, now I know YouTube, I'm okay. And after the presentation, he said, you know, it dawned on me after looking at your tips, this isn't anything innovative at all. It's just about being a good teacher. And I smiled and said, yeah, it actually is. The technology is easy. It's important. And you'll learn some awesome tips from Zoe, who's coming next. But this is about the human infrastructure. So it is the teacher, the facilitator, the camp counselor. You are still the most critical element. You still need to connect with your students and help them connect with each other. And I think I have here presence is about personality. Be yourself. You being you is the most important thing for your students and your counselors. They're going to get someone unique. You know, when I was at camp, Fred would come dressed as someone different every single morning to do the announcements. And the kids were just eager to see Fred because he was quirky and he was different. So, you know, think about how you can just be you, and that will be important online. So consistency. This is also really critical with communication. Establishing patterns right away for how you're going to communicate, when and where you're going to communicate with not just your campers or your students, but also your parents and your staff members. And this is really, if we move on to the next tip, a variety of vehicles. Whoops, not the next slide. Sorry, Leslie. Variety of vehicles, meaning you want to be able, it's sort of that concept of redundancy. You know how you need to tell I have 2 teenagers, so I need to tell them the same message, you know, vacuum your floor in 5 different ways, 4 different times before they might vacuum the floor. But this is, you need to communicate important information via several different channels, like have it on your website, send it by email, make sure it's in a calendar, have opt-in text messages. Maybe one project I just had a meeting about this morning, we're doing individual phone calls to the participants the week before the 3-day online session begins, because everyone is so frazzled right now and overtaxed that we can't depend on them seeing their email and their calendar and even text messages. We want to talk to them. Just because it's online doesn't mean you shouldn't pick up the telephone and talk to a person, right? So making a really solid communication plan and using a variety of vehicles are really, really important, because people will get their information in different ways. I think interpersonal communication, this probably goes without saying, and I'm probably really preaching to the choir here, but I think this is so important, that especially in summer learning, that informal and social tone is really needed. That yes, you need to be professional. We don't want to dumb anything down for our students or for our parents, but we are social beings, and making that personal connection is critical, especially if you're online and you're not, you know, hugging your people when they walk in the door, or seeing them on the weekends at, maybe if you go to church together or see each other at the grocery store. It's important. Empathy. I think empathy is a big buzzword right now, but especially right now where we've had all of the issues with COVID and people have been distanced from each other, and they have been forced to take on a lot of responsibilities at the same time, working while watching their kids in their house, maybe not having their regular employment. Going into things flexible with empathy and compassion is really critical right now. And I think that keeping that in mind when I'm preparing for my 10 different summer professional development experiences, we're talking about, yes, we're going to have schedules. Yes, we're going to have high standards, but we are going to be flexible, and we are going to be really caring, number one. Those are the most important things. Make time for and process for individual and group check-ins. So if you have, 50 kids in your program, doing group check-ins is great, but also finding a way. How can you check in with individuals? How can you build that in? Do you have office hours in your online platform? Can you do it by phone? Can you do it by email? What can you do to make sure that you're staying on top of individuals as well as groups? Okay, now we'll fly into a facilitation of learning. Again, these are so high level, and in 10 minutes, it feels a little bit like cheating to just whip through these things, but hopefully we'll get a chance to do a follow-up and talk about some concrete ways to attain these things. But for facilitation of learning, need sensing, I put this first because I think that I'm always trying to think about my work when I am facilitating groups of people designing online learning experiences, or if I'm facilitating an online learning experience, or if I'm teaching, of course, right? Always being aware, trying to predict, understand, and meet the needs of your learners. That should always lead how you're designing your program and how you're facilitating it, keeping their needs in mind. So establishing formal and informal ways to regularly assess those needs. That, you know, just like I said, we were going to give phone calls to these teachers who are participating in one of our PD programs this summer. It is a formal way to sort of assess their needs. They've signed up for this program. They're getting a stipend. They've been getting communication about it, but they're going to have some different needs now than they did a year ago when they signed up. So we want to do that personally. And then what's the process? Not just at the beginning, but what are ways that you can survey, meet with your staff, check in with both the people who are participating and other stakeholders, potentially parents, just sort of using your own, creativity to plan ahead for how you might keep track of the needs and document them, because if you know the needs and you address them, it will help you with the iteration of your program every year, right? And also facilitating learning, connecting contributions. So really recognizing learner contributions and specifically moving your community forward by connecting ideas and actions. It's really just, the concept of calling out individual kids or staff members for awesome things that they do, skills that they have, ways you want to highlight what they're really capable of and how it connects to what other people might need or be learning, and sort of use that connecting people for the greater good, whatever your learning goal is. Retaining your culture. This is really important. You all are running different kinds of summer learning programs. Some of them might be athletic, some of them might be academic, some may be a combination, some, they all have a particular culture. So try to think about why do campers come to your camp? Why do they return every year? And what are your traditions? How can you keep those alive in the online environment, right? So say you did what if the end of the week there's a bonfire with s'mores and people singing songs, and, the head of each color unit of tents gives a speech. How could you do that online? You might not have real s'mores and you may not have a fire, but you might actually have a video of that. You can still have your speeches. You can be creative about, maybe you work with parents to get marshmallows in the kids' houses, right? Just thinking about keeping that culture and experience, taking elements of that you can retain. And then differentiating your instruction. So that's, those are nice education buzzwords, but thinking about the flow of your daily activities. So what's going to be synchronous, meaning we're all together like we are right now, versus asynchronous? Will you have 10-minute breaks after a particular online activity and tell, okay, everybody needs to go outside and walk your dog for 10 minutes, do 100 jumping jacks, go get your mail. You need to move your body for 10 minutes and come back, right? So what's sort of asynchronous? Thinking about a combination of large group versus small group, collaborative activities versus individual things with maybe individual counselor or teacher feedback, just having a variety so that everyone gets a little bit of what works best for them, right? Okay, let's go to the next one. And this is just because I couldn't help myself. I was thinking, what are some of when you're facilitating the move online from just running your program face-to-face, what are some of the most important sort of global things? And I think remembering the power of collective intelligence. There's not necessarily one answer, one plug and play way. Your team, the people who do this normally face-to-face, you are the ones who need to invent how you're going to do it online. And you can do it best because you know your culture and you know how to do it well. So involve your team in the planning process. Next, can you make a game out of it? Can you make this interactive? Can you make it fun, both for your staff and for your learners? This one I think is important. Maintain an element of surprise throughout each day. So I know we have agendas and we have things that we're doing, but is there something like, oftentimes during camp, you'll have a counselor who will come in and throw water balloons at people or something different and unexpected, right? So can you think about that little tip and what can you do each day that people aren't expecting, but that's going to boost their spirits? And then, again, it's kind of obvious, but learning is social. So let's make sure that when you're designing, people, kids, and counselors are interacting because usually their best experience is a relationship they have with one of you who's running the program that you've created for them. And I think that's it. I hope I didn't take too much time. So there are some resources here. I know the slides will be available afterwards. And I'm going to pass on to the next person.
Thank you, Kirsten. Next, we're going to hear from Zoe Baptista, online learning designer at Brandeis University. Zoe?
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, Kirsten. My name is Zoe Baptista, and I am an online learning designer. Just started at Brandeis University, which is located in Waltham. Actually had the pleasure of working with Kirsten Peterson at Education Development Center, so it's been fun to collaborate with her on this. And today I'm going to be talking about how to set up the technology, which is a little bit boring, often feels boring, but I think of it as the basement and the foundation of all of your online training. So it's really important, and I like to start there. I came into online training over 15 years ago as a technology specialist, so that's kind of where I orient myself to these. So next slide. So the technology today that I want to share with you, essentially my goals for this short presentation is to make something actionable that you all can take away, because I'm sure you're all pretty busy. And, oh good, yes, I'm trying to watch, thanks Kirsten, I'm trying to watch the chat as you all are typing in too. If you can't hear me, please put it in the chat and I'll notice. So let's see, I wanted to talk to you about the 3 technology sort of platforms that I think are really important for setting up good online teaching and training. And then I wanted to share with you best practices that I have found really work for setting up these 3 different platforms and how to approach them so that you have the most success for yourself and for your students. The thing that I'm going to say is a lot like what Kirsten said, which is you will have to choose the platforms that work for your team based on your budget, your comfort with technology, your skill level, and what is right for your students. So this is just a high-level overview with a taste of different things, and you will have to do some research and figure out which 3 platforms you're going to choose to support your trainings. Next slide. So the first platform that I wanted to talk about is what's called an online meeting platform. This is an online meeting platform, Zoom, that we're in right now. GoToMeeting is another example. Adobe Connect is another example of an online meeting platform. I am slightly pushing for Zoom these days with online meetings just because everyone is using Zoom. So then you're more likely to have people who are comfortable in Zoom and can use it. So that, I'll speak up a little bit, so that, because then they sort of already know how to use the platform and they're a little more familiar with it. So Zoom might be something that I would recommend, but you might want something that's more professional looking, so Adobe Connect might be the one you choose. The way that I would approach setting up your online meeting platform is you want to practice in your platform and test everything. Technology will break. It always does. It's guaranteed. So you definitely want to practice and you want to be really comfortable using the platform because as a teacher, it's your main form of communication with your students. So you really want to know how does the chat work, how to move slides, anything you're sharing with your students through that platform, you want to be comfortable because you're the tech leader for that activity. And I also recommend when you're first starting out is keep the technology simple. Don't go into your first time in a Zoom meeting and play a video because the odds that it works are very small, the sound might not work, it can turn into a disaster. So it is much better to just be yourself, as Kirsten said, be that good teacher that you are, talk to your students and share the information you have, and forget the complex technology until you're more comfortable in the platform. I also recommend with my meetings, if you can, have a co-facilitator or an assistant in all your trainings. And this person really does three things. They can act as another person who's connected to the training, so that if you lose connectivity, like if I lost connectivity right now, one of the other facilitators can take over with me, and that can happen in your training. So to buffer that, you have two people, and then they can keep going. The other thing the co-facilitator can do is sort of say to you, hey, no one can hear you, or we can't see you, because sometimes your students won't tell you, and your co-facilitator's job is to tell you. And they can also act as an audience member and tell you how the training went. I actually don't know, I'm not getting any body language response from any of you right now, so the only way I would know if this training went well is if I talk to you afterwards, or I talk to my co-facilitators and say, how was that? So the co-facilitator can be really helpful. This next one's hardest for me because I have a perfectionist streak. You have to accept that things will go wrong. Your cat will walk in the background when you're trying to teach something, or over your keyboard, your internet will shut off. It's a live event, so it's a lot more like hosting a radio or a TV show. You just kind of have to be on the fly. So, yep, okay, sorry, so I'll try to speak up. Yes, sorry, okay. Again, right, so I need to know, like right now, Kirsten is putting, here's an example. Kirsten's putting in the chat, I need to speak up because people are having a hard time hearing me. So that's something that I need to be aware of, so that my co-facilitator's telling me your audio isn't working as well. So the last thing about the online platform is when the students get into the room the first few times, make sure you orient them to the technology. Make sure you plan time for that. Show them what the room is, show them where the presentation area is, have them practice using a chat box. Don't assume that just because they're younger that they know how to use the platform. Next slide. The next content management system that you'll want, sorry, the next technology system that you'll want in place is what's called a content management system, or a CMS. This sounds very complicated. It's really just either a website, it could be Moodle or Blackboard. It's a place where you house all of your slides, your handouts, your notes. It's anything that you've shared with your students, videos. You put it on that platform and they can go back and see that area between the meetings, so that they can go see the video of themselves, you know, playing a game or something that they shared, or they can go see the notes, and you can just put it in week 1, week 2, week 3. You will need someone who knows how to set up these kinds of platforms. It costs money because you will need to have this staff person set this up. But if you have a website for your organization, you could use a page on that website and put your materials in there. It's a way of being able to reach your students between the meetings with your materials. So all your materials are housed in one link for them to access between meetings. Again, with this platform, you want to practice and test everything. You want to get very comfortable in the learning management system, and don't put things in there that you haven't tested. So don't get fancy until you feel comfortable with that technology. Keep it simple. You want to also, this area, this particular kind of technology can ensure equity, because you can share visual tools, you can share video, you can share slides, you can share all kinds of different types of things. You can put closed captioning on the videos. You can test the PDFs to make sure they're accessible to screen readers. So it actually gives you more flexibility when you're putting things in a content management system, to make them more accessible to all different types of students, and also students who are more visual, or students who like to hear things, you know, in an auditory lecture, or who want to go back and listen to a recording of what you said. That actually can be a wonderful way to make your materials more universally adaptable to all types of students. So I love content management systems for this reason, because they can actually expand your classroom. And then also, you really want to test these online materials to make sure they're accessible for smartphones and tablets. And the reason that this is exciting, if you have it accessible, is because students can then, with their phone, can actually access your materials anywhere. They can be anywhere, they could be sitting somewhere, and they can learn one of your lessons, they could watch one of your videos, and so you can reach them in all kinds of situations. Next slide. The last platform is the online communication group. And this one, most of you will be very familiar with, is it could be an email group. It could be a listserv. It could be something like Slack or Piazza. Those are variations on communication groups. It's some kind of group that people use between meetings to talk to each other, so the students can ask you questions and also can connect with each other through email, so that they can stay connected and say, what was the lecture I didn't understand, or what was that lesson, or when are we meeting again? It's a way of having a connection between meetings with each other. Again, keep it simple, don't get complicated, don't use Slack if you're not comfortable, just stick with email. Most people know what email is. And again, don't assume that just because students are younger that they know how to use this technology. So you want to orient them and you want to make sure that they're comfortable with whatever communication platform you choose. Next slide. So that's it. I really just want to lastly quickly say, to just sum up, because I always like to tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then tell you what I told you. You need 3 learning platforms. You're going to have a virtual meeting platform like Zoom. You're going to get a content management system like some kind of website or Moodle, and then you really want an online group communication like email. And those are going to build the foundation and the basement for your training, so you can communicate effectively with your students and get your materials to them. And I just want to say thank you so much for all your hard work out there. I have children and they really appreciate all the work that you've been doing. It's been a lot for all of us, and I just really thank you. That's it.
Thank you so much, Zoe. Just as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording and the slides will be shared afterwards. Next, I'd like to introduce Roderick Clark, Director of Technical Training for NSLA. Roderick?
Hello, everyone. Good to see some of you. Good to see your names popping up.
Roderick, we're having a little trouble hearing you.
Okay. Let's see what I can do here. Let's see. How's that? Is that better?
That's good.
Oh, perfect. I really appreciate the piece on the logistics and the technology, and I'll echo some of that in my comments here today. But I want to just engage you in a little bit of experiential learning here. So I'm going to start with a mindfulness piece. And so to the extent that you feel comfortable, all I'll ask you to do is to get yourself into a space where you can just focus on your breath. Take a deep breath in, take a deep breath out. And we're going to spend just 1 minute of our time as I put some sounds into your ear. So just listen to the sounds, listen to the thoughts, and maybe be prepared to share 1, 2, or 3 words that come to your mind in the next 60 seconds. Fantastic. You can go ahead and type there in the chat box any words that are popping up there for you. Fantastic. Appreciate the energy. Yeah, this is a vibe. Appreciate the vibe there. My background, inspiring, nice vibe, relaxing flow. Fabulous. Cool. This is actually the first flute that I received when I was a freshman in high school back in 1984. And I've been carrying it on my life's journey up until this moment. And I've lost a lot of things since 1984, but for some reason, this sticks around with me. Fabulous. So I'm going to do another piece real quick. do enough real. Okay, please. I'll talk a little bit about my background in just a moment. I appreciate folks vibing off of that. So I'm going to do a quick poem for you all. It's called The Test of a Person. So the test of a person is the fight that they make, the grit that they daily show, the way they stand upon their feet and take life's numerous bumps and blows. A coward may fight when there's nothing to fear and nothing their progress bars, but it takes a cool person, a real cool person, to stand and cheer when the other person stars. It isn't the victory after all, but a fight that this person makes with their head held high, bleeding, bruised, and pale, and fear and fate is defied because they are not afraid to fail. Fabulous. That was called A Test of a Person. It's actually a modified version of it because it was a little gender specific in the original writing. Once again, my name is Broderick Clark with National Summer Learning Association. Some of you might know me as well from my work with the Weicker Center and NIAS. So super happy to be here to just take a couple minutes to talk about how we engage folks online and bringing, some of yourself forward in that. I think the person who is facilitating talent are essential. And so bringing those talents to the forefront, having the courage to put some of those out there and to see what's good. So as a traveling musician back in another life, you can imagine before you go out on the road that there's all these things that you have to carry. And if you've been through it one time, you'll know, like you get on stage, you start taking out all the equipment, you start plugging everything in, and you realize that you forgot this one cable. And then you're like, oh man. And so when I think about these online engagements and a lot of the conversation that we've had up to this point, it made me think back to those days of just being prepared and having some redundancy in your setup. So we had a couple of platforms that were presented to us here. Know what your platform is. Know the features of that platform. I know in my network, as much as I love Zoom, we're not allowed to use that. So we have to reconcile and use Microsoft Teams. And if you compare the two, it's not an apples to apples comparison. But rather than get caught up in limitations, like how do you, really get into that particular platform, understand what its features are, understand some of the ways that you can maybe use a third-party application to get at some of those features that might be missing from that. Did you practice with that feature before you jumped into the session? Hopefully you had an opportunity to do a couple of those before you start using it for the first time. Are you doing simple things that you can do that don't require a whole lot of investment, right? So if you have a laptop or that was made in the last 5 years or so, most likely there's that little pinhole camera in the front. And so instead of having your laptop with the screen leaning back so that folks get this kind of look on you there, that you just pick the laptop up so that the camera is facing you at eye level. The other piece is, are you using any kind of external things? Like for instance, here I have a condenser microphone that I'm using here connected to a digital mixer into my laptop. A little bit of overkill for some, but for some of the things that I do from here artistically, plugging in a guitar and another audio source like this, for instance. I don't know if y'all hear that. But, using those pieces are super, super, super important. The other piece is to make sure that your computer and stuff like that is updated. You ever have that blue screen that just kind of pops up, or that update screen that just pops up right at the wrong time? So making sure that all your drivers and your machine is up to date. Any updates that need to take place are put into place. The other piece that I find is that, as much as I love Bluetooth and wireless, sometimes just having a good old-fashioned wired connection to my audio source is so much more reliable. I've been trying to use a Bluetooth headset that I sound like I'm underwater, all different kinds of things. And it might be working in 1 second and then the next second it doesn't. I also discovered that the more wireless signals that you have running around your space could actually cause some distortion and degradation of your audio quality. So I learned that the hard way. This is the short cable, and then there's a long, extra long cable because I really try to maximize the space that I have here so that I can move around the space a little bit. Right? And then come forward so that, you know, that proximity to the camera is super important, and having that flexibility to do that. Fantastic. So let me scroll down here a little bit on my sheet here. The other piece is, again, redundancy in your setup. So if you're using videos or you're using any kind of external media or a file that you wanted to go ahead and put in the chat so that folks can download it, make sure you have extra copies of that. You know, make sure that you just have some redundancy in your setup. I see a question here. What headphones am I currently using? Yeah, so there's so many options out there that are super, super cost effective. So I've seen microphones like this as low as $50 from like a Guitar Center or someplace like that. You know, take a look there. Anything that you attach to your machine most likely will be a step up from what comes in your machine. In some cases, some of the more sophisticated, more high-end might have some really high-end stuff in there as well. I know I got just another minute to wrap up here. So just a word on the background here, making things visually interesting, I think is super important. So I just have YouTube videos running here in the background. One is off of a projector onto a large canvas here, and it's just a flat screen TV here. Both of them playing a particular nature scene, a fire. I think if somebody's hanging by the river there with a fire, but making sure that stuff is visually interesting, that you have decent lighting. I don't have anything fancy here, an old light set that you put an umbrella in front of. It diffuses the light a little bit, makes it a little bit softer. And some backlighting. So you see some of those hue lights or LifeX lights or whatever that you can change the color of those to create some sort of backlit situation. And just to echo everything else that's already been said, you know, be energetic, be upbeat, bring a piece of yourself without question. And I'll end how I started with another poem piece. So out of the night that covers me, black as a pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the felt clutches of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishment the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I'm the captain of my soul. Thank you very much for having me on this call, participating with this distinguished panel in a very important subject. I appreciate you all very much.
Thank you, Broderick.
Absolutely.
So next we're going to hear from Dan Tieu, Director of Marketing at Khan Academy. Dan?
Everyone, thanks for having me. I'll be walking through 7 tips for effective remote learning. As Leslie mentioned, my name is Dan Tieu. Khan Academy is a nonprofit with a mission to provide a free world-class education to anyone, anywhere. And during the last few months, I've been playing teacher assistant during the school closures with my niece and nephews. And so I've been using Khan Academy and practicing remote learning for the last couple of months. So Leslie, if we can go to tip number 1. Next let's skip these 2 slides to tip number 1. So I think Kirsten mentioned this in her presentation, that people think about online learning as technology. And yes, there's technology involved, but really at the center of learning is still you and your learners, so people. And so the first tip is about adapting your communication skills. If you go to the next slide. Now more than ever, in a time of social distancing, the ability to maintain any level of real-time communication is incredibly important. So kind of the first tip of this is if you and your students can connect live, please do it. So there are free tools like Hangouts Meet, Zoom. You've heard quite a few other technologies that are involved. But often all of these have the ability to record live sessions and to share them out for later use. So if you can do that, please try to make that, incorporate that into your communications. Secondly, let students know that you're thinking of them. Either send them a note via email, or there are apps like ClassDojo. Tell them that you're missing them, and what about seeing them when you see them in person is important, and how excited you'll be to see them when you are actually able to see them again. And you'll be surprised how much they'll miss you too. We hear quite a bit from students how much they miss the actual classroom itself. And then thirdly, please provide feedback. One of the key components of motivation is understanding purpose, and feedback is an opportunity to reinforce the work that they're doing and its purpose. So that's incredibly important. Next slide. Another important thing to note is collaboration at a distance. So there are tools like Google Docs and slides that allow students to collaborate with you in real time around shared problems and ideas. So there's Google Docs, there's Microsoft Office, and a suite of other tools. So the more you can do kind of collectively at a distance, it's incredibly important. And I think another thing to note is communicate with the community. I think Learning Heroes just released a survey showing how eager parents are during this COVID crisis in terms of how they want to really be involved in the process, and actually how activated they are in remote learning right now. So there's an opportunity to continue to keep that going. Parents and families are working remotely now as well. So that's incredibly important for us to recognize. So if possible, try to reach out to one or more family member per week just to share something about their students, how things are going. And don't hesitate to tell the parent or guardian how you appreciate them for supporting their child's remote learning during this time. And then finally, we're all stronger together. Sense of community is so important, especially in the time of social distancing. We've seen so many examples of this, and we often don't realize how important this is and how much it helps until you're actually doing this. So we recommend that you connect with other teachers, colleagues, other educators, and friends as you're going through the transition of remote learning. And you can use all of the same tools that were mentioned earlier with your students to connect with each other and other teachers. So that's tip number one. Tip number two is choose the best tools and stay with them. Remote learning is a big challenge for students. So switching between tools regularly makes it even harder for students to learn. So our first recommendation is to keep using what works. Sorry, Leslie, if you can go to the next slide. So recommendation one is keep using what works. So there are digital tools out there. If you've been using it through your class all year, like Khan Academy, great, keep using them. If not, you keep using what you have been using and what's been working for you. For new tools, pick ones that fit you and your students best. No one knows what's better for your class or for your students than you do. Use what's best for you and keep with it. I mentioned already, please don't switch back tools. I think the switching between, you have the overhead of trying to learn something new, and it can be very confusing and hard for students. All right. Tip number three, keep a schedule. I think this has been mentioned a couple of times. We know that building routine is important. It also helps with motivation. And so number one is stick with consistent times for working and connecting with students. The consistency is not just for your students, but it's actually also for yourself. It helps you kind of build out time for you to plan lessons, connect with students and family, and a couple of the other things that I mentioned. And so if you're looking for examples, Khan Academy, we have you covered. So if you go to this link here, we do have a set of daily schedules recommended for students. If you go to the next slide, it's broken down by different age groups, which is an important recommendation. And it highlights the importance of having a mix of activities beyond just academic content. So you can see we're recommending physical activities as well as creative activities. We'll be updating this over time, and it's free to adjust as you need. And so please, it's important to create a daily schedule. To go to tip number 4, support independent learning. So give students an agency in a time of remote learning, and it's incredibly important in their learning journey. Students can use this time to fill gaps, move ahead, or learn something new. At Khan Academy, we have what's called a mastery system. And so you can actually set goals below, on, or above grade level, allowing students to move at their own pace. And that's incredibly important. Some teachers even use the time to encourage and use the time to for students to kind of explore courses that are interesting and exciting to them outside of immediate subject areas. And so we have a link to our course mastery system if it's interesting to you. So if you go to the next tip, which is motivate your students. So I think it's important that I mentioned it's already hard to motivate your students when you're face-to-face. It's even harder when you're remote. So tip number one with motivating your students is really to set clear goals and include your students in the process. Sorry, Leslie, if you can go to the next slide. So number one, again, set clear goals. Communicate the goals with students and families, and not just the goals themselves, but highlighting the purpose behind the goals is incredibly important. And once you do that, another component of that is recognizing milestones. So try to celebrate either through a recorded video or virtual certificate or something to acknowledge the achievements of the students as they progress through the process. We have some free online certificates at Khan Academy. And then I also referenced motivation throughout some of the other tips. And so it's incredibly important to note that motivation isn't just a checklist of to-dos, it's sprinkled throughout the entire learning process. So tip number 3 is recognize the emotional impact. If you go to the next slide, it's an incredibly stressful moment in time, and it's fine to acknowledge it. In fact, it's important to do so. So I think number one, it's a moment to provide students with an opportunity to reflect. We recommend try switching out an assignment with an opportunity for students to write and reflect on something about remote learning and in their experience. And we encourage teachers to use the tools we mentioned before, whether it's Google Docs or Microsoft Office or any of those other tools. And it's also a moment to express gratitude. You know, whether you can use tools like email or ClassDojo to encourage other students, teachers, and families. So send messages, digital messages with moments of appreciation. And I think the incredibly important note here is to be honest with your students. You know, it's a moment where you can express vulnerability and to share your experience. It's a lot to take at once. Not only are you transitioning with the subject that you're trying to teach in this moment, but you're also adapting it to a different learning environment. And it's okay if they're struggling with a new tool or a new concept. In fact, what we've seen here during this time is that often students can get help with, teachers can get help with from their students on technology. You know, they might be more comfortable using Zoom and social media than educators are in this time. So it's okay to be honest and to role model that vulnerability with your students. And that takes us to the last but not least tip is cut yourself and your students a break. You know, this, again, I mentioned this is an incredibly stressful time, not just with remote learning, but with what we're going through right now. We're all learning this, and it's not business as usual for anyone. So be kind to yourself, cut yourself a break, and your students a break. So those are the 7 tips. If there's any questions, I have resources here that you can send, and happy to answer any questions. And then on the last slide, I have some links for resources that I mentioned and some additional resources that are available for remote learning. We, in fact, have a whole series of webinars for teachers, and there's almost over 30 webinars that we have available. So if you need a tip on anything specific, please visit those webinars.
Great, thanks, Dan. So we have a couple questions, and I see that we're coming right up on the hour. So before folks have to jump off, I wanted to talk about the next part of this webinar. So this is part 1 in the series. And as Kirsten mentioned earlier, we want part 2 to be more of a workshop for you all to really work out some strategies for this summer. So we want to keep the group small. So people who attended today are going to be invited to attend next Tuesday, June 2nd at 2 p.m. and we'll be doing some more hands-on work in those sessions. But while we're doing that, we want to figure out what areas you all would like to focus on. So if you should see a poll up on your screen right now. If you want to go ahead and choose which topic you wanted to focus on out of the 4 that we talked about today, we'll see where we will focus our energies next week. While you all are finishing up voting there, just for our panelists, if you want to come back on, if you're able to turn your video back on, there are a couple questions around that I'll ask, and anybody feel free to jump in. One question we had is, how can we handle issues of confidentiality and trust? For example, if we're working with teens around SEL practices, how do we create a safe space where kids feel like they can share openly and other kids won't record or screenshot or otherwise share the information from the online class?
So I'll take a jab at that one. Someone asked me the other day, so, you know, with everything going on with COVID-19 and us doing distance-based program, does it mean that we stop doing PQA, which is program quality assessment, right? And of course the answer to that is no. Like, we still keep our eyes on quality. I mean, Maslow was right. How do we keep young people safe, support them, and put them in situations to learn and lead? And that, I believe can transcend into this online world as well. I mean, setting those ground rules and expectations up front, doing that in partnership with the young people, having conversations about what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, honest conversations about those, elevating youth voice in those conversations, I think would be essential. I don't think we'll prevent everything that could potentially happen, but I think putting those pieces in, for me, in the virtual space is very similar to what we do, if not identical to what happens in the real world.
Thank you.
Sure.
So another question we have is, one problem we've run into is we don't have the staffing to supervise Zoom breakout rooms in small groups. How can we replicate the small group experience even though we don't have the staff to supervise?
It sounds like a great opportunity to engage parents in a different way. I know, these camp or clubhouse experiences are supposed to give parents a break, but, you might have some that are still super willing to jump in there and support us. But just don't put them into a breakout room, right? Provide them with the proper training to understand how to facilitate and moderate. And a lot of times we don't need necessarily them to say much. We just need that adult presence, particularly for the safety component. So that would be my recommendation. And then it's an opportunity for other staff that may not necessarily serve in that kind of capacity. Maybe it's a professional development opportunity for them to learn how to manage and moderate groups online.
I think the topic, the breakout session topics are important too. I think there are opportunities, if it's a creative exercise where it doesn't necessarily, require kind of adult supervision per se, there's an opportunity to leverage those types of breakouts. And then also if there are leaders within the group that you trust, you've built a trust to kind of lead those sessions, that's another option as well.
I see something in the comments from Amanda saying there's a way with Google Meet where you can create meets for smaller groups and you can be in each one at the same time as well, which is interesting. And then we have one last question for Dan. Somebody was wondering about how the Khan's platform compares to Google Classroom. If there are any similarities there.
So I'm not sure about the comparison of the platform, but Khan Academy, we provide resources, grade level courses from pre-K all the way through high school, covering things like math, ELA, humanities courses, and more. And then we also have a suite of practice exercises in addition to videos. And then we have tools where you can kind of check where you are in the skill level and help to remediate gaps and really help differentiated learning. So yeah, I think those are the main things that we can offer.
Great. So thank you everybody for sticking around. I know we're a little past the hour. And from our poll, it looks like next week we're going to be focused on facilitation of learning and engagement. So those will be the two areas that we're going to focus on. I will send out a follow-up email to this webinar to send you the link to register for next Tuesday, along with the recording of this webinar, link to the slides, and other resources that were shared. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for our panelists. Be sure to look out for more announcements of more webinars in our series. Next week, we will be having one on family engagement and also one on safety and camp guidelines from CDC, American Camp Association, for childcare, things like that. So look out for announcements about that one as well. And in July, we will be having our National Summer Learning Week. There will be time to celebrate everything summer. So look out for ways to be involved with that week and resources around that. And if you aren't following us already, please follow us on social media to receive the latest updates from us. You can also join our summer mailing list and learn more that as well. So thank you everybody for joining us, and have a good rest of your day and your week.
Thank you.
Thank you.